Alien students screamed in terror as a human's grinning skull stared back at them from their lecture hall holoscreen. The packed auditorium was supposed to be learning about sentient species and homeworlds. Instead, they cowered as Professor Thule spoke shakily about the only Deathworld known to harbor intelligent life, Earth. Professor Thule's pale blue scales rippled anxiously as he went on. From the smallest microbe to the apex predator, every Earth creature has evolved to be a lethal killing machine. Even the flora is toxic and carnivorous. To survive there, the humans became the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. The holoscreen shifted to a bipedal creature, covered in strange cloth. This is Greg Cooper, a human exchange student here to learn Deltan culture and science. Thule paused. And a former Earth Special Forces operative, trained to infiltrate and neutralize threats. Murmurs broke out. Wide alien eyes stared at Greg in shock and fear. A few students eyed the exits. Greg stood tall, realizing his very presence terrified them. He had to convince them he wasn't a threat, or his vital mission to establish peaceful human-Deltan relations could implode before it began. "I know our reputation, but we're not monsters," Greg spoke calmly but firmly. "Earth forced us to be strong to survive. We're here to learn and share knowledge, not conquer." The doors burst open. Armed Deltan officers stormed in. Greg counted 6, 2 snipers, 4 CQC specialists, weapons trained on him. His combat instincts screamed to neutralize them and escape. "Surrender, human! You're a threat to Deltan security," an officer barked. One wrong move, and Greg's diplomacy mission would devolve into a bloodbath that proved Deltans right about humans. He had to resolve this peacefully, or humanity's hopes to join the galactic community would shatter. Greg allowed the guards to cuff his hands behind his back, knowing resistance now would destroy any chance of peace. They marched him at gunpoint through stark metal corridors to a high-security wing of the Deltan military base. The guards shoved him into a chair in a dimly lit interrogation room. A panel of uniformed Deltan leaders glowered at him from across a metal table. "Human, we know you're a spy, not a mere student," a grizzled, scarred admiral growled. "Confess your true purpose on our world." Greg met the alien's eyes calmly. "I'm here to learn about your culture and establish ties between our species. Nothing more." The admiral slammed a fist on the table. Photos spilled out. Human warships, armies, colonies on Mars and the Moon. "Your kind are preparing for war. You've militarized your entire solar system, and now you infiltrate our world to uncover weaknesses for your invasion." "We explore and expand, but in peace," Greg started. But the Deltans cut him off with a barrage of barked accusations and threats. They demanded he reveal attack plans that didn't exist. He tried to stay composed as the interrogation intensified, devolving into screamed insults and graphic promises of execution for espionage. Greg realized there would be no reasoning with the paranoid Deltans. He had to... A deafening boom shook the room. Alarms wailed and emergency lights flashed red. The guards rushed out to investigate the explosion, leaving Greg unattended. He sprung into action, contorting to slip the cuffs under his legs and around to his front. Standard police restraints were child's play for special forces. Greg shouldered through the unlocked door and sprinted down smoke-filled passages, seeking an escape route. He ducked into a side corridor to avoid Deltan soldiers rushing by. As he navigated the maze of identical hallways, an odd glow caught his eye from behind a partially open blast door. Wary of a trap, but sensing something important, Greg slipped inside. His eyes widened at the nightmarish sight. Deltan scientists in biocontainment suits hunched over strange, pulsing, flesh-colored machines, making adjustments. Vats of bubbling, luminescent green fluid lined the walls. One had a label with a chemical formula and the ominous words, "Human DNA Trials." A chill ran through him as he realized what he'd stumbled on. The Deltans were engineering a biological weapon, a disease or genetic attack tailored to exterminate humans. He had to warn Earth, stop this weapon at all costs. Greg scanned for communications equipment, mind racing through escape and exposure plans. Heavy footsteps and shouted orders approached from the corridor outside. The Deltans had discovered his escape. Armed soldiers burst into the bioweapons lab, aiming rifles at Greg. Greg ducked as plasma blasts sizzled over his head. The Deltan soldiers had him cornered, but he wasn't about to surrender. He was a human special forces operative, trained in the art of warfare. Greg fired his stolen Deltan blaster at the cables, severing them in a shower of sparks. The lights flickered and died, plunging the hallway into darkness. Shouts of confusion echoed from the soldiers. Guided by faint emergency lighting, Greg slipped behind the disoriented Deltans. He grabbed one in a chokehold, using him as a shield, then shoved the limp body into his comrades. They tumbled in a tangle of limbs. Greg sprinted down a side passage. He needed to find a way out, warn Earth about the bioweapon. But which way? A hand grabbed his arm. Greg spun, ready to fight, but found himself face to face with Professor Thule. The Deltan's eyes were wide with fear. Thule led him through a maze of corridors, explaining breathlessly, "I've been investigating rumors of a secret military project. I never imagined this." He shuddered. "Factions in our government, conspiring to start a war. The bioweapon is just the start. They're determined to strike first, wipe out humanity." "So I have to stop this," Greg growled. "We have to," Thule corrected. "My people are on a dark path. I can't let it happen." He held out a hand. "Truce?" Greg clasped it firmly. "Truce, let's move." They emerged into a hangar bay. Rows of sleek Deltan fighters and transports gleamed under harsh floodlights. Thule rushed to a control panel, long fingers flying over touchscreens. "Jamming their communications, disabling security lockdown," he muttered. "There, I've cleared us a path to the space elevator. We can reach a ship, get you to Earth." A deep boom shook the hangar. A wall exploded inward, raining debris. Through the smoke strode a towering Deltan mech, bristling with weapons. A sneering Deltan commander was visible in the cockpit. "Thule, you traitorous worm," the commander snarled over loudspeakers. "Conspiring with the human filth, I'll vaporize you both." Laser cannons swiveled to aim at Greg and Thule. They dove apart as searing beams raked the hangar floor. Greg rolled to his feet behind a damaged shuttle, mind racing. He needed a plan. Thule crept to his side. "The mech is heavily shielded, but I know its weaknesses. There's a power relay on the back." Taking a deep breath, Greg charged into the open, blaster firing. The mech swiveled to face him, and he juked left, right, zigzagging to dodge the deadly laser beams. He vaulted onto a parked transport, leaping from its hull to a fighter wing. The mech commander roared in frustration, trying to draw a bead. Greg pushed off hard, sailing through the air, straight at the mech's armored torso. At the last second, he twisted, planting his boots against the mech's chest and kicking off hard. Greg arced over the mech's shoulder, spinning to slap a primed grenade on the power relay Thule had pointed out. He hit the ground rolling, scrambling madly for cover. The grenade detonated in a flash of fire and shrapnel. The mech staggered, sparks gushing from rents in its armor. Then, with a grinding screech of rending metal, it toppled ponderously sideways and crashed to the hangar floor, smoke pouring from its ruined frame. Thule gaped at him in awe, but there was no time to celebrate. More soldiers would be coming. They sprinted for the space elevator, riding it up its immense height to the orbital docks. Deltan crews scattered before the grim-faced, gun-wielding human and his Deltan companion. They commandeered a sleek courier ship, Thule frantically entering coordinates for Earth. The ship rocketed from the dock, pushing them back in their seats with immense acceleration. Greg watched the Deltan homeworld dwindle behind them, heart pounding. They'd escaped, but the real fight was just beginning. Thule worked to clean up the transmission, translating it to human standard. His eyes widened in horror as the decoded message scrolled across the screen. "By the ancestors," Thule breathed. "They're not just sending the bioweapon. The Deltan fleet is preparing a full-scale assault on Earth. Troop transports, battleships, carriers. They mean to invade." Greg's hand clenched into a fist. How long until they reach human space? At maximum FTL velocity, a week, perhaps less. Thule shook his head numbly. I never thought my own people capable of such madness. Greg keyed the ship's long-range comm system, praying Earth was in range. This is Special Agent Cooper to Terran High Command. The Deltan hegemony has turned hostile. I repeat, the Deltans are preparing a full-scale invasion of Earth. Their fleet is en route, ETA 7 standard days. They possess a targeted bioweapon lethal to humans. Planetary defenses and biowar countermeasures must be readied immediately. He took a deep breath, knowing his next words would echo through history. To all human worlds and colonies, a state of war now exists between the human alliance and the Deltan hegemony. Prepare for imminent attack. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Greg's hand trembled as he cut the comlink. The die was cast. There could be no more secrets or shadows. Humanity had to stand together against the Deltan menace or fall divided. Thule worked the ship's controls with grim determination, pushing the engines to their limit. The stars outside blurred into streaks as they raced for the nearest human outpost. Greg checked the sensor display and swore. A full squadron of Earth Defense Force Raptors, the most advanced fighters in the human fleet, and they were powering up weapons. They think we're hostiles, Greg realized. The Deltan ship's IFF was still active. To the EDF pilots, they looked like the enemy. Her attention, unidentified Deltan vessel. A stern voice crackled over the comm. This is Colonel Jack Hawkins, Earth Defense Force. Heave to and prepare to be boarded, or we will open fire. Greg's heart leapt. Hawkins had been his CO back in the Corps, the toughest, most uncompromising hard-ass he'd ever served under, but also the most loyal to his people. If anyone would hear him out, it was Jack Hawkins. He opened a channel. Colonel Hawkins, this is Special Agent Greg Cooper. Authorization code Alpha Zulu 9er Foxtrot. I'm aboard the Deltan ship, but not as a prisoner. I have vital intelligence that could impact the survival of the human race. Request permission to bring my ship aboard the EDF Titan urgent. There was a long, tense pause. Greg could picture Hawkins weighing his words, those steel-grey eyes narrowed in thought. Agent Cooper, your code checks out, Hawkins replied at last. You are cleared to dock with the Titan, but be advised, if this is a trick, I'll space you myself. Understood, sir. Cooper out. Under the watchful guns of the Raptor Squadron, Thule guided their ship into the cavernous hangar bay of the EDF dreadnought. As soon as the craft settled to the deck, a heavily armed marine detachment surrounded it, weapons trained on the hatch. Greg emerged first, hands raised. Thule followed, his blue scales pale with nerves. The Marines tensed but held their fire. Colonel Hawkins strode forward, his jaw set in a hard line. Cooper, you've got exactly 1 minute to convince me not to throw you in the brig for treason. Start talking. Sir, we've got a code black, Greg said urgently. The Deltan hegemony is preparing a full-scale invasion of Earth. Their fleet is already en route, and they've developed a bioweapon specifically designed to target human physiology. Hawkins' eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of his shock. You're certain of this? I've seen the bioweapons lab myself, Greg said grimly. Thule here can confirm he's one of the good ones, sir. Without him, I wouldn't have made it out. Hawkins studied the Deltan scientist, his gaze sharp as a laser. And you're willing to betray your own people. Why? Thule met his eyes steadily. Because my people are wrong. We should be striving for peace with humanity, not plotting your annihilation. I cannot stand by and let this atrocity unfold. Hawkins nodded slowly. Very well. Cooper, Thule with me. It seems we have much to discuss. He turned to his Marines. Lieutenant, have the Titan set course for Mars, maximum burn, and send a tight beam transmission to EDF Command. Praetorian Protocol is now in effect. As the dreadnought leapt into FTL, Hawkins led them to a secure briefing room. For hours, Greg and Thule laid out every detail of the Deltan plan, the bioweapon specs, the projected invasion timetable. Hawkins listened intently, his face grave. When they finished, he stood, squaring his shoulders. Gentlemen, we are now at war. The Deltan fleet will reach the outer colonies in days. We must make every second count. He activated a holodisplay of the Sol system. I'm putting you two in charge of strategic planning. Cooper, you know the Deltan military inside and out. Thule, you're our expert on their tech. We need countermeasures for those bioweapons yesterday. Understood?
Yes, sir,
Greg and Thule chorused. The Titan will serve as your mobile command post, Hawkins continued. I'll have my engineers modify a shuttle with Deltan IFF codes. You'll need it for any covert ops. Greg nodded, mind already racing with ideas. Infiltration, sabotage, surgical strikes to cripple key Deltan assets. It would be the most crucial mission of his life. We won't let you down, Colonel, he promised. See that you don't, Hawkins said grimly. The fate of our species rests on your shoulders. Dismissed. As the Titan scorched through space towards Mars, Greg and Thule worked feverishly, poring over intel reports, fleet dispositions, tactical projections. The bioweapon data Thule provided was invaluable. Already, EDF scientists were working to isolate the pathogen and synthesize a counter-agent. But would it be enough? The Deltan Armada was massive, their technology advanced, and they had a head start. The first blow fell sooner than expected. As the Titan entered Martian orbit, alarms blared across the ship. Proximity alert. Multiple incoming hostiles, the sensor officer cried. Deltan warships, fighter screens, bombardment pods. They're heading straight for the planet. On the screens, a wave of cruel angular vessels bore down on the red sphere of Mars, disgorging swarms of attack craft like angry insects. The orbital defense platforms opened fire, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Battle stations, Hawkins roared. The deck shuddered as the Titan's mighty engines flared to life, propelling the ship to the front lines. Around them, the EDF fleet moved to intercept Raptors and Hellbringers and Comet-class destroyers against a tide of alien steel. Space lit up like a supernova as the two armadas clashed, energy beams and missiles crisscrossing the void. Ships flared and died in eye-searing bursts of plasma, reduced to clouds of molten fragments. On the bridge, Thule worked rapidly to jam the Deltan targeting systems and comms, while Greg pored over the enemy formations, seeking patterns, weaknesses. There, a slight gap in their fighter screen, a chance for a boarding action. Colonel, I have a plan, Greg called, bringing up a schematic of a Deltan battleship. If we can get a team aboard that carrier, we can steal a sample of the bioweapon. Give our scientists more to work with. Hawkins studied the display, jaw clenched. It's risky. That ship will be a fortress, and we can't afford to divert too many assets from the battle. I'll lead the mission myself, Greg said firmly. Thule can talk me through the security systems. A small team can slip in and out. Hawkins held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Go, but make it fast. We're holding the line for now, but their numbers... He trailed off, eyes haunted. They all knew the odds. Minutes later, Greg was suited up and armed, leading a hand-picked squad of EDF commandos to the launch bay. They piled into the modified Deltan shuttle, Greg taking the pilot's chair. Initiating stealth mode, he reported, as the ship slipped free of the Titan's hangar and angled towards the seething heart of the battle. Thule, what's our best approach vector? The Deltan's voice crackled over the comm, taut with tension. Come in low and fast, hug their hull until you reach the auxiliary landing bay. Their point defenses will have a harder time targeting you. Greg wove the shuttle through the chaos of the battle, juking and spiraling, to throw off the occasional burst of enemy fire. The hull pinged and rattled as shrapnel peppered the shields. At last, the looming flank of the Deltan carrier filled the view screen, pitted and scorched from the ferocious exchange of fire. Greg deftly maneuvered the shuttle into the relatively calm space beneath the behemoth's engines, skimming along the armored hull until a dark crevice opened before them, the aft hangar. We're going in, Greg reported, hands flying over the controls. Get ready to move, team. We'll only have a few seconds before they... A thunderous boom drowned out his words, as a brilliant lance of energy slammed into the shuttle's rear quarter, sending it spinning wildly. Alarms shrieked, red lights flashing as the cabin filled with smoke. "We're hit," a commando yelled, struggling to brace himself against a bulkhead. "Port engine down, shields at 20%. Greg fought with the juddering control yoke, teeth gritted as he wrestled the crippled shuttle back on course. They were leaking atmosphere, the hull groaning under the strain, but the hangar was right there. With a bone-rattling impact, the shuttle half-crashed, half-skidded into the hangar bay, screeching across the deck in a shower of sparks before finally lurching to a stop. "Go, go, go," Greg roared, hitting the hatch controls. The commandos poured out, weapons up and scanning for targets, a handful of startled Deltan technicians scattered before them, no match for the black-clad human warriors. Greg emerged last, the shuttle a burning wreck behind him. No way back except to finish the mission. He checked his rifle and took point, leading the team at a dead run towards the carrier's interior. "Thole, I need a route to the bioweapon storage," he called over the comm. "And see if you can shut down their internal defenses." "Working on it," Thule replied, his voice strained. "But Greg, your shuttle. I'm not reading any other life signs." Greg closed his eyes briefly, forcing down the surge of grief and rage. His team, his friends, reduced to broken smears of carbon, just like that. "Understood," he said roughly. "We'll complete the mission, for them, for Earth." They plunged into the bowels of the alien ship, a small band of human survivors against impossible odds, the fate of their world hanging in the balance. And in that moment, Greg swore to himself, to his fallen comrades, to every man, woman, and child waiting helplessly back on Earth, he would not fail. Not now, not ever. The Deltan monsters would pay for their crimes, even if he had to rip this ship apart with his bare hands. The bioweapon, find it, secure it, and then burn this alien abomination down to the last bulkhead for Earth, for humanity. His grip tightened on his rifle as he moved deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the enemy vessel, eyes cold and hard as the void outside. It was time to show these Deltan bastards what it meant to pick a fight with the human race. Greg's blood ran cold as he pored over the stolen data files. The truth was worse than he could have imagined. Zorgax, the Deltan warlord, had orchestrated everything. The bioweapon, the false flag operation, the entire war. All to seize power and crush humanity. "We have to expose this," Greg growled, his fists clenched. "Bring Zorgax down and end this war." Thule nodded grimly. "But how? Zorgax's forces control Deltan space. We'd be shot down before we even got close." A figure emerged from the shadows. Arya, leader of the Deltan rebellion. Her scales gleamed like polished steel. "Not if you have inside help," she said, her voice hard as flint. "My rebels have been fighting Zorgax's tyranny for years. We know every secret base, every hidden route. We can get you to his stronghold." Greg met her fierce gaze. He saw the same fire there that burned in his own heart, the determination to fight no matter the odds. He clasped her arm, warrior to warrior. "Then let's bring this bastard down." They slipped through the Deltan blockade like ghosts, Arya's rebel ships guiding them along sensor-blind corridors and asteroid fields. As they flew, reports trickled in from the front lines. Earth's forces were rallying, beating back the Deltan advance. A cheer went up in the rebel ranks. Hope kindled. But Greg couldn't celebrate yet, not until Zorgax was finished. They reached the warlord's stronghold, a fortress of black metal bristling with gun turrets and shielded by a crackling energy web. Arya's eyes narrowed. "Zorgax will be in the central command bunker," she said, pointing to a heavily reinforced structure. "But it's swarming with his elite guard. We'll have to fight our way in." Greg checked his rifle, the weight familiar and reassuring in his hands. "Then let's give them a fight they'll never forget." They landed in a hidden ravine, the rebel ship's engines dampened to avoid detection. Greg, Thule, and Arya led the charge, a mixed force of human commandos and Deltan rebels at their backs. They struck like lightning, catching the outer defenses off guard. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as they battled their way into the compound, leaving a trail of shattered Deltan war drones and elite guards in their wake. Greg fought like a man possessed, his rifle spitting death, his body a blur of motion. At last, they reached the command bunker. The doors were a foot thick, laced with reinforced alloy. Greg slapped a breaching charge on the metal and primed the detonator. "Fire in the hole!" he yelled, and the rebels ducked for cover. The charge blew, shredding the doors like tissue paper. Smoke and flames billowed out, and Greg charged through, rifle up and scanning for targets. There at the center of a ring of hollow displays and control panels stood Zorgax. The warlord was a mountain of muscle and armor, his eyes burning with madness and hate. He leveled a massive plasma cannon at Greg's head. "Foolish human," Zorgax snarled. "You think you can stop me? I will grind your pitiful species to dust." Greg dove to the side as a plasma bolt sizzled past, close enough to scorch his armor. He rolled to his feet, firing back, but Zorgax's armor deflected the shots like rain. Arya and Thule rushed in, laying down a blistering barrage of cover fire. Zorgax roared in fury, swinging his cannon to face them. Greg saw his chance. He leapt, jetpack flaring, and slammed into Zorgax from behind. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, Greg raining down blows on the warlord's armored hide. Zorgax threw him off with a snarl, rising to his feet. His cannon swung around, aiming point-blank at Greg's chest. A plasma bolt slammed into Zorgax from the side, staggering him. Arya stood there, rifle raised, scales glowing with the heat of battle. "For Deltan freedom!" she cried, and fired again. Zorgax's armor cracked, sparks and smoke pouring from the breaches. The warlord howled in pain and rage, cannon swinging wildly. Greg charged, jetpack flaring. He slammed into Zorgax, bearing him to the ground. His fists hammered into the warlord's face, cracking armor, shattering bone. Zorgax thrashed and fought, but Greg was relentless, a lifetime of training and battle-honed strength behind every blow. At last Zorgax went still, his eyes rolling back in his head. Greg staggered to his feet, breathing hard. It was over. The monster was beaten. But there was still work to do. Thule rushed to the control panels, fingers flying over the keys. "I'm broadcasting all of Zorgax's files on every frequency," he reported. "His betrayal, his crimes, the Deltan people will know the truth." Arya stood tall, her eyes blazing with fierce pride. "And they will rise up," she declared. "Zorgax's tyranny dies with him. The Deltan people will be free." Greg nodded, exhaustion and triumph warring within him. They had won. Against impossible odds they had brought down a tyrant and ended a war. But even as the stronghold erupted into cheers, as Deltan and human voices raised together in celebration, Greg knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of threats. Earth would need guardians, warriors to stand against the darkness. He stood tall, rifle held high. Come what may, he would be ready. For Earth, for humanity, the fight would never end, but neither would he. Plasma bolts seared the air as Greg and Arya charged into the fray, rifles blazing. Deltan guards fell before their onslaught, but more rushed to take their place, pouring fire at the human rebel strike team. Greg ducked behind a shattered console, slamming a fresh power cell into his rifle. Arya slid in beside him, her scales slick with sweat and blood. "They just keep coming," she snarled, popping up to snap off a burst at the advancing guards. "Then we keep fighting," Greg growled back. He lobbed a plasma grenade over the barricade, the detonation shaking the floor and sending Deltans flying. Across the room, Thule crouched over a sparking data terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. "Almost there," he called out over the din of battle. "Just a few more seconds." A plasma bolt whizzed inches from his head, making him flinch. Greg and Arya redoubled their fire, buying Thule the precious time he needed. With a final triumphant keystroke, Thule straightened. "It's done, broadcasting now." Suddenly the stronghold's comm screens flickered to life, Zorgax's image appearing on everyone. But instead of a rallying war cry, the warlord's voice was panicked, desperate. "No choice. The humans forced our hand. We must strike first, seize the advantage, or be destroyed." The recording changed, showing Zorgax ordering the creation of the bioweapons, planning the false flag operation, irrefutable proof of his warmongering, his manipulation. Confusion rippled through the Deltan ranks as they watched, lowering their weapons in shock. Arya saw the opportunity and seized it. "Deltans, you've been deceived," her voice rang out. "Zorgax is the true enemy, not humanity. Lay down your arms and—" A plasma bolt slammed into her chest, sending her crashing to the floor. Zorgax's elite guard, still loyal, opened fire with renewed ferocity. "No!" Greg roared, charging from cover, heedless of the plasma bolts scorching past him. He cradled Arya in his arms, pressing a hand to her wound. She coughed, blue blood flecking her lips. "Greg, don't let it be in vain. Finish this." Her eyes drifted shut, her body going limp. Grief and rage surged through Greg's veins, cold and clarifying. He rose to his feet, plasma rifle humming with deadly charge. Outside, the tide of battle shifted as the truth of Zorgax's treachery spread. Deltan ships broke formation, some surrendering, others turning their guns on the loyalist forces. The EDF seized the chance, driving deep into the enemy's fractured lines. But Greg had eyes only for Zorgax. He stormed through the stronghold, Thule at his side, cutting down any guard foolish enough to stand in their way. They found the warlord in his inner sanctum, a towering monstrosity bristling with cybernetic enhancements. Zorgax bellowed in rage, lashing out with devastating force. Greg met him head-on, rifle forgotten, combat knife in hand. They clashed in a whirlwind of slashing metal and sparking circuits, Zorgax's monstrous strength against Greg's lightning reflexes and iron will. Blow after blow, Greg rained down upon the warlord's armored hide, his blade finding the chinks, the weak points. Zorgax roared in pain and fury, redoubling his assault, but Greg was relentless. With a final desperate lunge, Greg buried his knife to the hilt in Zorgax's throat, the warlord's lifeblood gushing over his hands. Zorgax toppled like a felled tree, his reign of terror ended at last. Greg staggered back, chest heaving, as Thule rushed to his side. Around them, the last loyalist guards threw down their arms, their will to fight extinguished with their leader's fall. In the skies above, the EDF hammered the Deltan fleet, the once mighty armada reduced to drifting wrecks and clouds of debris. The bioweapons lay cold and inert, a horrific testament to the depths of Zorgax's madness. The war was over. But as Greg looked out over the ruined stronghold, the battered ships, the fallen soldiers, both human and Deltan, he knew that the scars it left behind would linger long after the guns fell silent. The galaxy had changed, wrenched onto a new path by the actions of a few desperate, determined beings. And Greg Cooper, the human soldier, the unlikely hero, stood at the center of it all, a legend forged in the crucible of war. His fight was far from over. There would be new threats to face, new battles to win. But for now, in this moment of fragile peace, Greg allowed himself to breathe, to mourn the fallen, and to hope for a future where human and Deltan could stand as one against the darkness. The stars awaited, and Greg Cooper would be ready for whatever they held. Greg and Thule stood before the United Galactic Nations Assembly, the eyes of 100 worlds upon them. The grand chamber buzzed with 1,000 alien tongues, a symphony of clicks, hisses, and melodic tones. Greg stepped forward to the podium, his voice ringing clear. "We stand here today not as human and Deltan, but as citizens of the galaxy. The war that nearly destroyed us all was born of fear, mistrust, and the failure to see the humanity in each other." Thule nodded solemnly. "But from the ashes of that conflict, we have a chance to build something new, a galactic community founded on understanding, cooperation, and the belief that our differences make us stronger." The assembly erupted in applause, a cacophony of stomping feet, clapping hands, and alien appendages. Greg and Thule looked out over the sea of faces, some familiar, some utterly alien, but all united in hope. In the months that followed, Greg and Arya threw themselves into their new roles as co-ambassadors. They oversaw the construction of joint human-Deltan research facilities, where scientists from both worlds collaborated to push the boundaries of knowledge. They organized cultural exchange programs, sending human students to study on Deltan worlds and Deltan artists to perform in the great theaters of Earth. Slowly but surely, the wounds of war began to heal. But in the shadows, Zorax plotted and schemed. He gathered his followers in secret meetings, stoking the embers of their resentment. "The humans have made us weak," he snarled, his scales rippling with rage. "They have stolen our pride, our strength. We must take back what is ours." His words found fertile ground in the hearts of those who had lost everything in the war. Disgruntled veterans, their bodies scarred and minds haunted by the horrors they had seen. Families of the fallen, their grief twisted into hatred, they flocked to Zorax's banner, hungry for vengeance. Greg and Arya first caught wind of the growing threat through whispers and rumors. A shipment of weapons intercepted here, a rally turned violent there. They pieced together the clues, a picture of Zorax's plan taking shape. "He's going to attack the joint research facility on Tharos Prime," Arya realized, her eyes widening in horror. "The opening ceremony is in 3 days. Human and Deltan dignitaries will be there, along with thousands of civilians." They scrambled to assemble a team, reaching out to old allies and new friends. Thula hacked into Zorax's communications network, trying to pinpoint the location of his base. EDF special forces readied their weapons, preparing for a lightning strike. But Zorax was always one step ahead. His network was a labyrinth of dead ends and false leads, his loyalists scattered across a dozen worlds. Greg and Arya chased ghosts, always arriving too late, the trail gone cold. Until a breakthrough. An informant, one of Zorax's inner circle, reached out to them in secret. "I can't be part of this anymore," he whispered, his hands shaking. "The things he's planning, it's madness. Pure madness." The informant provided them with a set of coordinates, deep in the lawless expanse of the Outer Rim, Zorax's stronghold, where he was marshalling his forces for the final strike. Greg and Arya wasted no time. They assembled their team and set out for the Outer Rim, determined to stop Zorax before it was too late. But as they approached the coordinates, they realized they were flying into a trap. A swarm of Zorax's fighters emerged from the asteroids, lasers blazing. Greg and Arya's ship rocked under the onslaught, shields straining. "It's an ambush," Arya shouted over the wail of alarms. "We have to punch through." Greg gritted his teeth and pushed the engines to full throttle. The ship leaped forward, bobbing and weaving through the enemy fire. Laser blasts scorched the hull, but they kept going, racing towards Zorax's stronghold. They docked in a burst of sparks and smoke, the ship's systems on the verge of collapse. Greg and Arya leaped out, weapons drawn, their team close behind. They charged into the stronghold, ready for anything. But what they found inside defied their darkest imaginings. Row upon row of war machines, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Weapons of unimaginable destructive power stacked high in the cavernous bays. And in the center of it all, Zorax himself, his eyes glinting with madness. "Welcome, Ambassador," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're just in time to witness the beginning of a new era, an era of Deltan supremacy." Greg raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It's over, Zorax. Surrender now, and you might just live to see a trial." He pressed a button on his wrist, and the war machines came to life, their engines roaring. Zorax's loyalists surged forward, weapons blazing, and all hell broke loose. Greg and Arya dived for cover as laser blasts filled the air. They returned fire, taking down Zorax's men one by one, but they kept coming, a seemingly endless tide. Greg's boots pounded on the metal grating as he raced through the dimly lit corridors of Zorax's bunker. Alarms blared, red emergency lights flashing, casting eerie shadows on the walls. He gripped his plasma rifle tight, finger hovering over the trigger, ready for anything. Arya's voice crackled over the comms. "Bioweapon facilities neutralized. But the whole place is coming down. We need to move." Greg gritted his teeth. They'd come this far. He couldn't let Zorax escape, not with so much at stake. He rounded a corner, and there, at the end of the corridor, stood the Deltan terrorist leader himself. Zorax sneered, his scales glinting in the harsh light. "Are the great hero come to save the day?" Greg leveled his rifle. "It's over, Zorax, surrender." But the Deltan only laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You still don't understand, do you? There can be no peace between our kinds. One must dominate the other. It is the way of things." "You're wrong," Greg shot back. "We're stronger together, humans and Deltans working as one." Zorax's eyes narrowed. "A pretty dream, but a dream nonetheless. Let me show you the reality." With a lightning-fast move, the Deltan drew a hidden blade from his sleeve and lunged at Greg. Greg barely managed to parry the blow with his rifle, the force of the impact sending shockwaves up his arms. They traded blows, Zorax's blade flashing, Greg's rifle butt swinging. The Deltan was fast, unnaturally so, his genetically enhanced body granting him speed and strength beyond the human norm. But Greg had something else, the sheer, stubborn tenacity of the human spirit. He fought on, even as Zorax's blade sliced across his ribs, drawing blood. He struck back, his rifle cracking against the Deltan's skull, sending him reeling. They grappled, rolling on the floor, each seeking to gain the upper hand. Around them, the base shuddered and groaned, explosions echoing through the corridors. Time was running out. With a final desperate effort, Greg managed to knock Zorax's blade away and pin the Deltan down, his rifle pressed against his throat. Zorax glared up at him, eyes filled with hate. But before he could respond, a massive explosion rocked the base, throwing them both off their feet. He looked down at Zorax, struggling to rise. He could end this, right here, right now. Ensure the Deltan could never threaten the peace again. But as another tremor shook the moon, Greg knew he had no choice. If he stayed to capture Zorax, he'd be trapped, doomed along with the base. And Earth and Delta still needed him. With a last regretful look at his foe, Greg turned and ran, racing against time to reach the evac shuttle. Explosions chased his heels, the very ground buckling and cracking beneath his feet. He leaped over gaping chasms, dodged falling debris, his heart pounding in his ears. There up ahead, the shuttle, Arya waving frantically from the ramp. Greg put on a final burst of speed, lunging for safety. He tumbled into the craft, the ramp slamming shut behind him as Arya punched the thrusters. The shuttle rocketed away from the dying moon, Greg watching from the viewport as Zorax's base erupted in a final, cataclysmic fireball. The Deltan terrorist leader was gone, consumed by his own destruction. But even as relief washed over him, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Zorax may be gone, but his ideas, his hatred, would linger. There would always be those who sought to divide rather than unite, to destroy rather than build. As the shuttle fled into the void, speeding towards the distant lights of the human Deltan fleet, Greg knew his fight was just beginning. For peace, for understanding, for a future where all species could stand as one. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, he would not rest until that dream became reality. Greg stared out into the infinite black, his jaw set with resolve. "Now," he said softly, "we finish this once and for all." Greg's boots pounded on the metal deck as he dragged Zorax's limp form through the disintegrating Deltan base. Explosions rocked the structure, showers of sparks erupting from ruptured conduits. The acrid stench of burning circuitry filled the air. He reached the evac point where Arya and the rest of the strike team waited, weapons at the ready. They piled into the sleek Deltan ship, Greg dumping Zorax's body unceremoniously on the floor. "Go, go, go!" Greg shouted, slamming his fist on the hatch controls. The ship shuddered as Arya fired the thrusters, tearing away from the doomed moon base. Zorax stirred, a groan escaping his split lips. His eyes snapped open, blazing with fury. With a roar, he surged to his feet, lashing out at his captors. Greg barely had time to react before Zorax's fist cracked against his jaw, sending him staggering back. The Deltan lunged for the ship's controls, his fingers flying over the unfamiliar interface. Arya cursed, grappling with the yoke as the ship bucked and weaved. Zorax managed to call up the weapon systems, a cruel grin splitting his face as he targeted the human and Deltan fleets hanging in space. "No!" Greg launched himself at Zorax, tackling him away from the controls. They crashed to the deck, a tangle of flailing limbs and bared teeth. Zorax was strong, his enhancements lending him inhuman power. But Greg was driven by something more, the knowledge that if he failed, countless lives would be lost. He rained down blows, feeling bones crack and scales shatter. The ship rolled and pitched as Arya pushed it to its limits, trying to evade the volleys of fire erupting from the fleets. She wrenched the yoke, sending them into a dizzying spin, the inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. In the chaos, Zorax managed to throw Greg off, staggering to the weapons console once more. His clawed finger stabbed down on the firing stud. Greg slammed into him, knocking his hand aside at the last second. The ship's guns discharged, the recoil sending them tumbling across the deck. Warning klaxons blared, red lights pulsing. They fetched up against the airlock, Zorax pinned beneath Greg's weight. The Deltan thrashed and snarled, his eyes wild. Greg's gaze darted to the emergency release, then back to Zorax's hate-filled face. He had a choice: capture Zorax, drag him back to face justice, or end this here and now, ensure he could never threaten the fragile peace again. Greg's jaw clenched. He reached for the release, his blood-slicked fingers leaving smears on the controls. He hit the release. The airlock doors snapped open, the rush of escaping atmosphere hurling them both into the void. Greg clung to the edge, watching as Zorax's flailing form dwindled into the darkness, swallowed by the pitiless emptiness of space. Then Arya was there, hauling him back inside, the airlock slamming shut. Greg collapsed on the deck, his chest heaving, his vision swimming. It was over. It was finally over. The ship, battered but unbroken, limped back to the waiting fleets. As Greg stumbled out onto the hangar deck, supported by Arya, a cheer went up from the assembled humans and Deltans. In the days that followed, the true depths of Zorax's schemes came to light. His network of sympathizers and saboteurs was uncovered, rooted out like a festering wound. Treaties were signed, alliances forged in the crucible of shared pain and sacrifice. Greg looked out over the gathered dignitaries, Arya at his side, and saw not humans and Deltans but a single united people. The road ahead would be long, the scars left by the conflict slow to fade. But as long as they stood together, as long as they refused to let fear and hatred rule them, there was hope. He squared his shoulders, ready to face the future, whatever it might bring. For in the end it was not the strength of arms or the power of technology that would shape their destiny, but the indomitable will of those who dared to dream of a better tomorrow. Greg's boots crunched on the rubble as he picked his way through the ruins of the Deltan capital. The once proud city lay in ruins, a testament to the devastating power of the Vorai's weapons. Smoke still curled from the shattered remains of buildings, and the stench of death hung heavy in the air. He paused, his gaze drawn to a tattered banner fluttering in the breeze. The emblem of the human Deltan alliance, now faded and torn, a bitter reminder of all they had fought for, all they had lost. A hand touched his shoulder, and he turned to see Arya standing beside him. Her scales were dull, her eyes haunted by the same ghosts that plagued his own. "We did everything we could," she said softly. "The Vorai were too strong, too ruthless, but we made them bleed for every inch of ground they took." Greg nodded, his jaw clenched tight. He remembered the desperate battles, the screams of the dying, the searing heat of Vorai plasma ripping through their defenses. They had fought with everything they had, but in the end, it hadn't been enough. "I keep thinking about all the lives lost," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Human, Deltan, it didn't matter to the Vorai. They slaughtered us all the same." Arya squeezed his shoulder, her touch a small comfort in the face of so much grief. "We can't let their sacrifices be in vain. We have to keep fighting, keep pushing back against the darkness." "I don't know if I have anything left to give," he admitted, the words tasting like ashes in his mouth. Arya turned him to face her, her eyes blazing with fierce determination. You're not alone in this, Greg. We're in this together until the end. And I know you have the strength to keep going, to keep fighting for what we believe in. Her words struck a chord deep within him, rekindling a spark of the fire that had once driven him. He thought of all the people counting on them, all the lives they could still save. He couldn't give up, not now, not ever. He straightened his shoulders, a new resolve hardening in his eyes. You're right, we've come too far to quit now. The Vorai may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. Together, they turned their backs on the ruins and strode towards the future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They had each other, and the unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of war, and that would be enough to see them through the darkest of times. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.